But let's get to it, y'all, because I have a big one today, and it's going to cover a few different topics. But I think this is really important to sort of weave these things together for everybody. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had tremendous consequences, not only for the people of Ukraine who are suffering immensely. It's also had pretty significant consequences for the world. People know about the conversations about what's happened in energy pricing. But one of the other trickle-down effects that is very notable and worrying has been an explosion in the cost of fertilizer, which is a necessary factor in food sources for millions, I mean, frankly, billions of people. And in Africa, especially, Russian fertilizer represents a huge portion of the market, notably in Cameroon, Ghana, Mauritania, and Cote d'Ivoire. And Africa already uses, as a continent, much less fertilizer than other continents. Um, because such a tremendous amount of food in Africa is local production. And as people know, the problems with local production is that the yields are much lower and they're much more susceptible to, sort of geographic and environmental factors. So local production has not and is not meeting the food needs of Africans. So the farming that is done using fertilizer is critically important to nourishing people on the continent. Now, prices have increased to like 50 on fertilizer, have increased like 50% in countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon, according to the Financial Times. And total African production of staples is predicted to fall by 12% this year, which means hunger and higher prices for people who are already living in dire circumstances. And these kind of shortages not only mean higher food prices, but also higher rates of food importation, which lacks that security and is also subjected to the ups and downs of the global economy and currency exchange. And that second bit is really important. We've covered on the show, you can find the video, the show, The Crisis in Sri Lanka, where a lack of foreign exchange, for people who aren't familiar with what that means, it means foreign currency that's held by government and businesses in a country so that they can purchase goods on the global market. And typically that's done in the US dollar. In Sri Lanka, the crisis in their foreign exchange, having depleted foreign exchanges, led the government to make a series of disastrous calls, like banning chemical fertilizer to free up foreign exchange. And this led to mass crop failures in Sri Lanka, and millions of people have been plunged into hunger, leading the people to rise up and force the ouster of former President Rajapaksa. And this is a whole other conversation, but this also is a reminder to folks about how important it is to really work through our strategies with what we're demanding when it comes to policy. Because when you start messing around with food production, you are literally messing with people's lives. Now, y'all might have heard about the strength of the United States dollar, um, but it's not as well known, I don't think, what that really means for the developing world. As the Federal Reserve is waging wars on U.S. workers and wages, the rich across the globe have increased their demand for the United States dollar because it's seen as a safe and secure asset. And when all these people are demanding and buying up US dollars, it pumps up the price of the United States dollar and other currencies. And this has significant consequences as most developing countries buy goods in the United States dollar. So the real cost of imports is going up because to get the United States dollar, it means they're having to pay more in the first place. And as those costs go up, more and more of these countries are having to take out debt. And what currency do you think people take out debt in? They take out debt in the United States dollar because investors and international institutions require debt to be denoted and paid in United States dollars instead of a local currency. Equally as important, a strong United States dollar means that global trade is usually depressed. For countries with smaller economies, there is less room to absorb that downturn, and the costs are felt most acutely by the poor and the working class people in those societies. It also increases the power of global creditors to demand governments pursue the policy initiatives most favored by the global rich, stunting democracy and replacing it with much more naked neocolonial rule. In Argentina, a country that has been struggling with the IMF for years, a part of their new deal with the IMF is directly targeted against working people. And a brief bit of history: former President Macri of Argentina, a right wing anti worker, president, indebted the country to the IMF and cut social programs dramatically. A center-left populist coalition came into power. I've covered this much more extensively than I'm going to be able to in the show, but I have 3 videos to suggest for folks. One was one I did for Jacobin called Getting Money Out of Politics Isn't Enough to Save Democracy. Another one is for us here at Left Reckoning, Argentina taxes millionaires to pay for COVID relief. And the last one is from the Michael Brooks show, Argentina's fight against vulture capitalists. Now, if you want a more in-depth understanding of what's been going on in that country, particularly the financial relationships, I highly suggest you check those out. But since coming into power, this new government has faced a coordinated assault from capital that has effectively kneecapped the government. And now, this isn't the only factor, but these things are crucial for understanding why things happen on a material level instead of like on a personal moral level. Oh, that leader didn't have enough heart or care or something like that. There are material circumstances that allow for things to get much, much worse, even when you have a kind of center left progressive populist government. Now, the new Argentine economy minister, Sergio Massa, is working to meet the demands of the IMF, most notably by cutting fuel subsidies that go to working people. That country is already facing an economic crisis and rampant inflation, nearly 70% this year. The working class in that country is already squeezed, and the IMF is demanding that their energy costs skyrocket. Why? So that they can protect profit, so that they can protect the power and the interests of capital, so that they can come in and swoop up and benefit from the devastation of the country. Now, remember, former economic minister Guzman resigned over the summer because of the lack of popular support for these draconian IMF policies. That's the game that capitalism plays with democracy, enforcing deeply anti-human and dangerous policies on the masses for the benefit of the few. It also has to be noted, since we brought up Argentina, we're going to do more on this very soon, but lawfare is rearing its head in Argentina as well. And for people who aren't familiar with that term, lawfare is a way to describe political warfare that's using the legal system to do it. Most notably, Lula da Silva was victim of that. This week, Argentina's public prosecutor is now seeking for the imprisonment of popular former president and current vice president, Cristina Kirchner. And most importantly, because it doesn't look like there's much that's going to be set in these allegations of corruption and grifting. Most importantly, is seeking her disqualification from office, because a lot of people have been thinking she's going to run for president again in this next election cycle. These kind of attempts to use the legal system to gum up and prevent certain candidates from running has become a mainstay in Latin America. Most notably, it was used against Lula da Silva, and similar kind of tactics were also used against Dilma Rousseff in Brazil as well, which a lot of people forget. Lula faced erroneous charges of corruption that led to his false imprisonment and the rise of the clown fascist Bolsonaro. From the undemocratic Federal Reserve in the United States to the tools of anti-democracy like the IMF, to a turn of the courts, because the right truly fears democracy, the fight against capitalism and for democracy are deeply, deeply interwoven. I know I covered a lot of different topics there, but like it's important, I think, to sort of reckon with the fact that all of these things are deeply rooted in this kind of dual fight against both like the capitalist class, the investor class as a whole, but also those forces, deep, deep disdain of democracy and people being able to decide, hey, do you think that it's a good idea that we're going to cut fuel subsidies in a crisis like this? Right? Like these things are very, very much interwoven, and you have to have that kind of perspective if you're serious about doing something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sri Lanka case is just, I think, a horrifyingly. It's just like a lesson that needs to be learned,
Mhm.
right? Like, and a line that shouldn't be crossed in certain things.
And I mean, what's we're seeing in Africa right now is a reminder
Mm.
to folks that we need pretty significant social investments still to meet the human needs of the global population. And we're nowhere near at capacity for winding stuff like that down. We need to be expanding it quite dramatically, frankly. But we need to be doing that by wresting control from private interests who have no real care for working people or for the environment.
Yeah, and I don't know if Kowalski from Nebraska is in the audience, but maybe in the post game we can get an update because I know he's been monitoring that fertilizer situation. Um, and yeah, it's a pretty existential world issue.
Well, before we go to the post game, I did just want to note a bit of good news out of Brazil, where Bolsonaro's boys, some of the millionaire backers of his candidacy and his disastrous anti-worker, anti-people presidency, were just raided by the government in Brazil because they have been talking quite seriously about pursuing a coup d'etat. And we'll maybe have to get Brian on to give us a little bit more of the details here. But the Supreme Court Justice Alexandro de Moraes ordered a search operation of 8 different people in 5 states, including Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Um, and it's showing that the courts are very, very much taking seriously these threats that we're getting from Bolsonaro and his supporters about not respecting the democratic mandate that's very likely to come, electing Lula da Silva back to the presidency of Brazil. And I just want to read one of the intercepted messages here to just
Hmm.
show people how violent and nasty the rich in that country are thinking, and also a good reminder, going back to what we were talking about a second ago, about how the global system, the global financial system, doesn't really care how you do it as long as their profits are protected. So this is from Jose Corey, who's a real estate tycoon in Brazil, who was one of the people who was raided. Quote, I prefer a coup than the return of Lula's Workers' Party 1,000,000 times. And certainly no one will stop doing business with Brazil. They do business with various dictatorships around the world. So Brazilian magnate, they're learning the lessons from the Joe Biden and the Obama presidency that we don't really care about what's happening on the ground there as long as y'all don't get in the way of private industry.
Yeah, and I have to look at the details and get Brian's reaction because I think Bernie was talking about that Bernie's Brazil bill about how we're going to take a stance on any government that comes to power through non-democratic means. And I mean, you watch Edge of Democracy on Netflix, the documentary, and you will hear people just casually say, yes, it's time to stop this whole charade of elections and stuff, and just put the generals back in charge. It's that is a more significant part of Brazil than like QAnon is here, right? Like that is a real like sentiment there, and it is terrifying. But I think stay positive. I mean, if the department or whatever the Brazilian Department of Justice is cracking down on these folks, I don't know this judge,
Mhm.
but I mean, I think that's a good use of government state justice is going after people who are doing
We're
coups.
going after the rich, yeah. I will note, just like to put a period on the point you're just making, that like one of the most horrific and like I think telling Lula lines about what rich people were saying about Brazil during his presidency. One of the complaints that was sort of relayed to Lula was that because of his policies like Bolsa Familia, basically providing food and economic support, along with many other policies that lifted up millions of people out of poverty in Brazil. The rich were complaining, quote, that the airports in Brazil are starting to feel like bus stations, which is, I think everybody knows exactly what they're saying. They're complaining about the fact that there was more social accessibility for certain groups who were sort of left out of the
Hmm.
ability to be able to travel the country quickly and the globe as a negative aspect of Lula's presidency. So, like, that's what they're up against there. And that's why it's encouraging to see that, whatever Bolsonaro's sort of reign was, the social forces that brought him into power, that the justice system there is taking that threat very seriously, because I think you should take Bolsonaro very seriously when he says that he's not going to respect the results of that election.
Yeah, this from Politico. The new BBB, Bernie's Brazil bill. Bernie Sanders fears Brazil's democracy as it heads into a raucous presidential election in October, and he wants the U.S. Senate to officially stand on the side of voters, regardless of who they choose. let's see. So I mean, I think maybe that was, and we can get Brian on again to clarify, like, because he was talking about different sorts of congressional actions that were happening behind the scenes. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, has a quote: "Only God will remove me from office." Bolsonaro said a year ago, "I will never be imprisoned." Yeah, you're gonna lose an election, bro.
Yeah.
You have to get the fuck out.
Well, everybody, I think we're going to jump over to the post game where we'll be joined by Lillian again, and we'll be taking your voicemails. You can leave us a message at, put it up, 1940-289-7234. We'll also be taking Discord questions, so you get access to that and our bonus episodes, which come out every Sunday at patreon.com/lovereckoning. I really appreciate everybody hanging out with us tonight, and we'll see you soon.